So we've been talking about properties of matter, and now we need to talk about what really gives materials their properties and what they're made of. So first thing is I want you to look at this image over here and just think about, have you ever seen this before? What is it? Where have you seen it before? I'm sure some of you have seen it if you've watched like Jimmy Neutron, or if you've just seen, like typically when people are trying to show science, they put up this image. So what is it? So that's our goal today, is to learn what this is and what like this part of it is and what this part of it is, and really figure out what we know about this. Okay, so if you said that last picture was of an atom, you are correct. So all matter, we've talked about matter, anything that has mass and volume is made up of tiny particles called atoms. So the definition of an atom is the smallest particle that makes up an element. And all matter is made of atoms. All right, so what are the parts of an atom? So as you can see in this picture over here, as you can see in this picture over here, there are different parts that make up the atom. So we have electrons, protons, and neutrons. So all atoms have a thing called the nucleus at the center. Okay, so your nucleus is at the center, which you can see right here. And then the nucleus, what you see there in the middle, that contains most of the mass of the atom. So an atom contains mass, and remember that mass is what contributes to like the overall size and weight of a substance. So the nucleus is made up of, if you can see in this picture, it's made of protons and neutrons. Okay, so your protons and your neutrons are in the center of the atom, in the nucleus. And then the electrons are what move around the outside of the nucleus. So you can see those over here is an electron, here's an electron. So they're moving around the outside of the nucleus, kind of going around in circles. Okay, so the first part of the atom we're going to talk about is the proton. So remember, protons are inside of the nucleus. So they're in the middle. And then protons have a positive charge, as I'm sure you can tell from the drawing over here, the model. So the orange represents the proton. So this is a proton, this is a proton, and this is a proton. So notice they're all in the middle in the nucleus. The way I like to remember that protons have a positive charge is I like to think of propos. I don't know, I just remember it because it's 3 letters, both start with P. Propos, okay? And then the number of protons tells us the atomic number of an atom. We'll talk more about what atomic number is when we talk about the periodic table in a little bit. Okay, the other part of the atom that's inside of the nucleus is the neutron. So neutrons, remember, are inside of the nucleus. You can remember that because they sound the same. Neutron, nucleus. Neutrons have a neutral charge. Again, it sounds the same. Neutron, neutral. Neutron, neutral. Which means neutral just means that there is no charge. They're not positive, they're not negative, they're just kind of there. So you can see in this picture over here that the neutrons are represented back here with the protons, and they are in the nucleus. So the neutrons and the protons, because they're in the nucleus, that's really what gives the atom its mass. Okay, and the last part of the atom that we're going to talk about is the electron. So electrons are actually outside of the nucleus. So they have a negative charge. So as you can see in the diagram, in the model over here, they are outside the nucleus. They're in this, they call it the electron shell because they're just going around the nucleus. So atoms usually have the same number of protons and electrons. So as you can see in this model, you have 3 protons, 1, 2, 3, and you have 3 electrons. 1, 2, 3. Okay? So remember, electrons are negative, protons are positive. So the reason that you have usually the same is because negatives cancel out positives, or positives cancel out negatives. So it keeps it balanced so that there's not more positives or more negatives. It keeps it so there's not one of more than the other, okay? One thing to remember, too, is that electrons are much smaller than protons. So all of these things are really tiny. Like, you cannot see these with your eyes, of course, but electrons are even tinier than protons. Okay, so now that we've learned about the parts, let's practice identifying them in this model. So these atoms both have blank protons. So let's look at the key that we have, and let's identify what the protons are. So the protons, remember, they're positive. So we're going to count up how many of the positives we see. We have 1, 2, 3. This one has 1, 2, 3, right? So there are 3 protons in each of these. Now let's see how many neutrons we have in each atom. So neutrons, as you can see, are just the neutral. They have no charge, so they're just a gray circle. So this one has 1, 2, 3, and this one has 1, 2, 3, 4 neutrons, okay? How many electrons are in each atom? So let's find the electrons. So we have, remember, the electrons are negative, and they are not in the nucleus. So we need to look on the outside of the atom. So this one has 1, 2, 3, and this one has 1, 2, okay? Okay, so we've learned about atoms, and we know that they're teeny tiny little things that make up all matter. But the thing is that before you get to the matter part, atoms make up elements. So basically, all those tiny atoms, if they're the same type of atom, they're going to join together to form an element. So elements, you've probably seen this before, hopefully. It's called the periodic table of elements. You may have seen pictures of it. You may have learned about it before. We're going to learn more about it in our next lesson on Friday. But first, we're going to talk just briefly about it right now so that you have a basic understanding. Okay, so some elements on our Earth are super common. So, for example, hydrogen, which is right here on the periodic table, is very common. Oxygen, which is over here, also very common, right? Carbon, also very common. Nitrogen, these are the things we find like in our air and that we are around all the time. Some are really rare. So some of these ones that are more like down here, these are more rare things that we don't see or are around very often. What elements do you guys already know? You probably already know some of the ones I just mentioned. You might know some others that I haven't mentioned. The thing about the elements is they're arranged in this table based on a few things, but right now we're just going to talk about how they are they're arranged by their atomic number. So as you can see, I know these boxes are small, but you can see that they have a little number at the top of each box. So for example, like this one is 4. And then over here you have 5, and you have 6, and you have 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, right? It keeps going and going and going. Those numbers are the atomic numbers. And if you remember from before, the atomic number is the number of protons in an atom. So that number tells us how many protons are in the atoms that make up those elements. Okay, that's one way that the periodic table is arranged. We will talk about more ways on our next lesson.